I wish I had some good news to share with y'all today.
Girl, no you don't. You live for bad news, just like I love when you have bad news. So let's stop playing and get these clicks.
But unfortunately, this is all I got. The National Park Service has removed the word transgender from the Stonewall Monument website.
Good, because historically, transgender wasn't a thing when Stonewall happened, so it just doesn't deserve to be there. The original movement was called the Gay Liberation Movement. So literally, Stonewall was a gay historic event. You're not taking this well. What's up, everybody? Rivera here, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. Okay, you may remember this person from a couple weeks back when they were complaining about the fact that they weren't able to change their sex marker on their passport. Which, it occurred to me after I recorded that video, they were making it sound like it was so dangerous now because they looked like a woman, but their ID would say male. So basically, their passport would out them. But how many people actually see your passport compared to your TikTok, where you're constantly telling the world that you are trans, getting millions and millions of views? So to act like your passport is what's putting you in danger or your passport is the threat to your safety does not make any sense, and you're gonna have to come up with a different argument. But anyway, now she's on one because
the National Park Service has removed the word transgender from the Stonewall Monument website.
Which, if you're not familiar with Stonewall, I've talked about it before, and I'll put a link as the pinned comment if you want to see my full detailed version of how that all started. But just to catch you up really quick, the Stonewall is actually a bar where the original gay rights movement, which eventually turned into the LGBTQ movement, started. And apparently there's a park there. I've been to the Stonewall Inn. I don't remember seeing a park. I was there like a civilized human being just to get drunk on a night that I happened to be in New York. I wasn't looking for a park. I wasn't looking for a monument. I wasn't looking for history. I was looking for a stiff drink, which, by the way, that was one of the things the Stonewall bar was known for back when the gay liberation movement started, was they had really weak drinks because they were owned by the mob. And every once in a while, the mob would shake the gays down and the police would come in and raid the Stonewall Inn every once in a while. But supposedly the mob had paid off the police, so the police would leave them alone at different points. But at the same time, every once in a while, allegedly, the police would even steal from the gays at the Stonewall. So on the night of June 28th of the 1969th year of our Lord, the police showed up to raid the place. The gays had it, and it turned into a riot, which some say was a riot and some say was more like a party.
We were cheering and dancing in the street. That's not a riot.
It was just a loud and bawdy fun group of guys until it turned into a riot.
It is called a riot, an uprising, a rebellion.
Which, if I know the gays, it was definitely more like a party, even though it did start as a riot. There was a whole thing where it was actually violent in the beginning, and then it graduated into a party like everything else with my community. So let's get in this video, and I'll interrupt at the points where I feel like she needs a little bit of help on this one.
I wish I had some good news to share with y'all today, but unfortunately, this is all I got. The National Park Service has removed the word transgender from the Stonewall Monument website. So yeah, if you go to the website, it's like, okay, cool, a whole governmental website.
Okay, so transgender has been removed from a governmental website. When you say a governmental website, do you mean the same type of governmental website where Donald Trump had made an announcement that there would no longer be any reference to transgender ideology on a governmental website? Do you mean that kind of governmental website? Which I know I'm saying governmental website a lot right now, but I've got to be very very clear. Donald Trump has already said that this would not be a thing during his administration. He signed an executive order saying that this would not be a thing in his administration. He's taken the TQ off of everything and left the LGB. So I don't really know why you're surprised when he's already been very clear about this.
A whole governmental website about the uprising that literally paved the way for the LGBT community. But then it's like, oh, wait, the TQ plus was literally cut out. Like, we never existed once again. Now, I want y'all to repeat something after me. Stonewall wouldn't have happened without trans people.
Not only could Stonewall happen without trans people, Stonewall literally did happen without trans people, because the trans people that they usually cite when they talk about Stonewall, if you need a little bit of LGBT history, are Marsha P. Johnson.
Many believe that the powder keg exploded when a trans woman named Marsha P. Johnson picked up a shot glass and threw it, shattering the mirror behind the bar. It wasn't Johnson's first feat of activism, nor would it be her last.
And Sylvia Rivera.
Sylvia Rivera is known for throwing the first bottle at the Stonewall riot.
Because the way the lore goes is that supposedly Marsha P. Johnson had set off the Stonewall riots by throwing what would have been debatably either a shoe or a shot glass or a bottle. It's not clear what people say that Marsha P. Johnson threw in order to start the riots, but it has been passed down that Marsha P. Johnson had thrown something, and that's what kicked off the riots. But even by Marsha P. Johnson's own admission, Marsha P. Johnson didn't get there till after 2 a.m. and after everything was going.
I was uptown. I didn't get downtown till about 2 o'clock, because when I got downtown, the place was already on fire and it was a raid already.
So by the time she got there, the riot had already started. So keep that in mind, right? Marsha P. Johnson herself has said that she was not there at the time that they started. So that takes Marsha P. Johnson away. We're left with Sylvia Rivera, but we'll get to her in a second. So when it comes to the way that the riot actually started, that again is debatable, but gays that were actually there.
4 independent accounts who said that this woman's fight with the police is what tipped the scales and set it all off.
Say that most people thought that if anybody really set it off and anybody really started it, it would have been a lesbian by the name of Stormy DeLarvier.
Some people say that woman was Stormy DeLarvier, a lesbian who worked as a bouncer at the time.
Which they now describe retroactively as having been a
gender nonconforming person that several witnesses credit with catalyzing Stonewall.
Which in my day would have been what we just called either a butch lesbian or the D word that rhymes with bike.
She was very butch and she was tough, and the police were being rough with her, and she was really fighting back.
We're not allowed to say that word here. It's considered hate speech. I know a lot of hardcore butch lesbians that actually take pride in that word, just like I take pride in the F slur, but we're not allowed to say either of those on YouTube. So let's say the word that rhymes with bike. She was one of those. So with her being one of those, I don't know why they want to change it to a gender non-conforming lesbian just to make it suit the trans narrative. But that is the person, Stormy DeLarvier, that many think set it off.
She called out to the crowd, "What are you doing? Why are you just standing there? Why don't you do something?"
Even though, like I said, that's debatable.
DeLarvier sometimes took credit and sometimes denied her role, but so far there's been no conclusive proof of who exactly that butch woman at Stonewall was.
So then we're left with Sylvia Rivera, right? Because supposedly Sylvia Rivera was a part of what started the Stonewall riots.
I have been given the credit for throwing the first Molotov cocktail, but I always like to correct it. I threw the second one. I did not throw the first one.
But according to people that were part of the initial movement, like a person that was very instrumental and very well known, a person by the name of Bob Kohler is who I'm referring to.
Suddenly Marsha would come along and grab my shirt and say, she always called me by my two names, Bob Kohler. Never called me Bob, ever.
And Bob Kohler, who was friends with both Sylvia and Marsha P. Johnson, says that Sylvia Rivera wasn't even actually there when the Stonewall riots happened. Not there at the beginning like Marsha P. Johnson and then got there later on in the night. I mean, not there for the entire time. She wasn't hanging out in that area at that time. She was hanging out in an area called Bryant Street, which I'm not the most familiar with New York, so I'm not going to pretend like I know where Bryant Street is, but it's another part of town. So she wasn't at the riots altogether. Then later on, they retroactively, there's that word again, decided to say that Sylvia Rivera was actually at the riots because they felt as a community, Bob Kohler and some of the other gay men felt that the young Puerto Rican kids on the scene needed someone to look up to, and Sylvia Rivera was a Puerto Rican, at the time, self-described drag queen, and so they went ahead and included Sylvia Rivera even though she wasn't actually there, which might have been your first example of actual DEI in the LGBTQ community, or at the time, the gay community. But Sylvia Rivera bargained with Bob Kohler because he was the one that was in charge of backing up her story. So he was the one that was supposed to co-sign to the fact that Sylvia Rivera was in fact there. So Sylvia Rivera wanted to make it juicy, like most drag queens do. I don't blame her even a little bit. But Sylvia Rivera's idea was to say that she threw a Molotov cocktail. And Bob Kohler was like, girl, you didn't throw no Molotov cocktail. I'm not saying nothing like that.
Second of all, it's not certain that Molotov cocktails were thrown at all.
So Sylvia Rivera was like, okay, well then tell them I threw a bottle. And Bob Kohler was like, girl, you did not throw a bottle. I'm not saying you threw a bottle. So then she was like, okay, well then tell them I threw a brick. And so he was like, I'm not gonna say that you threw a brick. So then finally he was like, okay, let's go with bottle. So that became known as Sylvia Rivera's part, is that she threw a bottle. But it's very important to remind you that Sylvia Rivera was not actually there, or that's what people say. And Marsha P. Johnson, who was very good friends with Sylvia Rivera, had said later on several times and repeated to many people when Sylvia Rivera would talk about the Stonewall riots like she had been there, going with the cover story, Marsha P. Johnson would tell her, girl, you know you weren't there. So that literally takes away the two trans people that were supposed to be so pivotal in the original LGBTQ movement or the gay liberation movement. But we're gonna let her go on.
Yup, say it with me. Stonewall wouldn't have happened without trans people, Jesus Christ.
And since she's repeating it, I want to be very clear about this. There's a lot of evidence and interview footage to suggest that Marsha P. Johnson didn't actually identify as trans.
I have a lot of issues with the way Marsha is being presented. And I'm not the only one, because everybody who was friends with Marsha really has a problem with Marsha being presented as a woman. And if you told Marsha that she would be represented publicly as a woman, erasing Malcolm Michaels, well, I don't think a lot of people would have liked Marsha's reaction to that.
And maybe in the later part of her life, like the last couple of years, she had decided she was trans. But at the time of the Stonewall riots, Marsha had considered herself either a transvestite, which would otherwise be known as a crossdresser, or sometimes she would say she was a boy in women's clothing, or sometimes would refer to herself as a sissy.
You know, I would tell them I was a boy and I was in drag. And I would tell them that I would go like hustling, and would they want to go out? And they say yes, I want to go out. And then when they get up in the hotel, and I take off all my clothes, say, I can't believe it's your boy. That I noticed me and couldn't sleep. I was a real woman, honey. I'm just a transvestite.
Which none of those things are an actual trans person. And then when it came to Sylvia Rivera, again, the other trans woman that was supposedly at the Stonewall riots that we've already decided wasn't at the Stonewall riots. But just to put another nail into the coffin of this myth, Sylvia Rivera identified as a drag queen up until the end of her life and didn't get on hormones until the end of her life, which I know some people will try to come back on me and say, well, maybe transsexual wasn't a word. Actually, the word transsexual first became an actual thing in 1949 and then became popularized in 1966. Keep in mind, the Stonewall riots happened in 1969. So they definitely would have been able to use that particular word. And to be completely honest, I'm not trying to wipe away the legacy of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. They actually were very instrumental and very helpful when it came to the original gay liberation movement. And at a point, they started up an organization of their own called Street Transvestites Action Revolutionaries, which offered services and advocacy for queer youth. And they also both, through that organization, did some very important work for the community, including fighting for the Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act, otherwise known as SONDA, in New York, which SONDA is an act that prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation in employment, housing, public accommodations, education, credit, and the exercise of civil rights. So, like I said, both of them did make an actual contribution, and it was an important contribution. But again, I will remind you, they did it as men in drag. That's what they did it as. They did it as homosexuals. They didn't identify as transsexual. Later on, Sylvia Rivera came to identify as transgender, and you could kind of say that she was the start of the transgender movement, because not only did she identify as transgender, but she made transgender what it is, as far as including drag queens and butch lesbians and kind of anybody that was gender non-conforming. So if you ask me, even though, like I said, they were helpful in the original gay liberation movement, at the same time, Sylvia Rivera's legacy is kind of destructive because she's kind of the impetus and the catalyst of what we're dealing with now, with this unidentified thing as transgender that was originally sold to us as just being an updated version of transsexual. And I know that some people in the community will say that if you identify as trans at any point in your life, or decide that you're trans, or realize that you're trans at any point in your life, that means that you've been trans your entire life. I don't really go with that theory. So if anybody tries to make it about that, I would say no, that wasn't the actual thing. And like I said, those particular trans people that you're talking about were not there at the time of the riot. So to say that it could not have happened without trans people is just factually incorrect, when it literally did happen without trans people, or at least in the way that you say, because actual witnesses and participants said that
there were some individual people of color, but it was not a group of trans people of color who started the rioting.
But trans people were not the driving force or what made the actual riots happen. Before we go any further, I'm just going to ask that you like, comment, and subscribe. We're on our way to 100,000 subscribers. We just passed 71,000, so please do me the favor, hit the subscribe button. When you hit the subscribe button, click on the bell to make sure you set it to all notifications so that you know every time I upload. Now let's get on with it.
Fortunately, the National Park Service has just become another source of blatant misinformation.
Actually, with everything I said, which can all be Googled and researched, and believe me, I Googled and researched and did a lot to find out this information because I wanted this to be as accurate as possible. But with everything that you're saying, you and people like you are the actual source of misinformation in this particular instance.
Stonewall was not just about LGBT rights, baby. That's not true.
You're right. It really was just about actual gay. And at the time, lesbian wasn't really considered to be something different from gay, or at least the way that the movement or even the way that the media covered it. In a lot of cases, it was just referred to as the gay community. So it was gay men and gay women fighting for gay liberation, not to take anything away from the lesbians, not to take anything away from the bis, even though bi didn't become part of the community until later, as far as officially went. And even currently, apparently bi people get a lot of BS because they're not considered to be in some ways gay enough, or people want them to pick a side, which I joke about that sometimes, but I really don't care, and I accept bi people as being bi people, and I don't think most people have a problem with them being a part of the community. But I'm just talking about historically, what Stonewall was about was gay liberation, meaning gay men and gay women. So really, as far as historically goes, they could take the B off and just leave it LG on that particular monument, and I think we would still be all right. The TQ, though, does not have to be there. I'm not going to argue with you guys. I did a lot of research. I'm kind of testy. I'm not really testy, but I did do a lot of research.
It was about the rights of the whole community, trans included.
It wasn't about the whole community because there was no whole community at that time. There just wasn't. Let me run you through it and just hit the high points, because I'm sure that some gay historian like my good friend Thomas Davis, who corrected me on another video where I said that Chapel Roan was just a regular straight woman. Apparently Chapel Roan is a lesbian. I did not know that, but thank you, Thomas Davis, aka Turdisa, aka Thomasina Davis, gay historian, had corrected me on that, and so every once in a while I'll get something wrong. But when it comes down to the community itself, the way it goes is it was gay liberation, then it went on from gay liberation to just being the gay community. Then from the gay community, it became the gay and lesbian community. Then it became the gay, lesbian, and bisexual community. Then it became the lesbian. I don't know how the lesbians moved to top billing, but they did it, probably because the lesbians do most of the clerical work when it comes to being gay. The lesbians are the administrative side. I have no problem admitting that, and I have no problem with them taking a little extra credit and putting themselves at top billing. But it became the LGBT, which is lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans. That was it. Then it became LGBTQ, which was lesbian, gay, bisexual, and the Q could stand for queer or questioning, depending on who you asked, but a lot of people would say it that way in the beginning. That's when I really started noticing the difference in the community, was when it became LGBTQ, which, like I said, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, and questioning, or queer or questioning. Some people would say it different ways. I heard both. But anyway, then it became the LGBTQQ to cover the queer and questioning. So the one Q wasn't good enough anymore. It became the LGBTQQ. That was just a quick moment in history. Maybe it was just my life because I was in LA and people are super gay there and care about that stuff. But I do remember when it was LGBTQQ. Then it became LGBTQIA. Then it became LGBTQIA+. Then it became
2S LGBTQPIA+.
You get the point. And more recently, most recently, a lot of people started changing it just to being the LGB again, which again, I don't have a problem with it being LGB, because when I was coming up, the trans people didn't even want to be a part of the community. They felt that they were something different from gay, which they are, and their goal was to eventually transition to live as the gender that they wanted to live as and no longer be a part of any real community, just live basically as a straight person and fly under the radar. That used to be the goal of trans people before everything became what it is now, and we ended up at the madness that we're at now. And even though I think that as a community we should always be a safe space for trans people and a place for them to get their bearings and figure everything out, I don't really know that they necessarily need to be a part of the community, and I don't know how much longer we as gay people or LGB are going to really need to be a community, because originally what we wanted as the gay community was we just wanted people not to bash us. And keep in mind, by the time I was out, we were dealing with people where AIDS was still a scary thing and people were still dying from AIDS. They were starting to figure the meds out and the cocktails out. But anyway, my point is, people were still dying of AIDS. And so that's when we as a community started to see that marriage, or for people like me, something that was like marriage, a contract that would be comparable to marriage, that didn't necessarily, for my personal taste, have to be called marriage, but that's what it became, was gay marriage, was an actual necessary thing, because what was happening was people would die, and next of kin to the deceased would sometimes come in and take whatever the deceased had really left for their partner, or in some cases what them and their partner had built together, but it just happened to be in the name of the deceased, or the name of the deceased was on the deed, let's say. And so the next of kin would come in and say, okay, well, we need to sell this place and get their half of it. And things like that literally were happening. So that's when the gays noticed that there was probably a need for us to be able to get married so that we didn't get left high and dry when our partners passed on, if our partner should pass on. Then there was also the thing to do with visiting your partner in the hospital. If you're not immediate family or a spouse, then you're not allowed to see the person in their last stages. And so that was another reason that gay marriage became necessary. So once we got gay marriage, and once people weren't trying to actively unalive us anymore, then I think most of us were kind of ready to let go of any kind of fight, and we're just looking to chill and enjoy our lives. But the activist groups like HRC and GLAAD needed to still make money because they wanted to be able to pay their salaries, and they liked the status that being parts of those organizations gave them. So that's when the fight transferred over to trans rights, and that's where it's turned into like a never-ending battle. And for the activists, that's great. For the people, including the trans people, that's not great at all, because you see what it turns into, and now privileges are starting to revert back. And maybe I'll do a video on the rights that trans people are losing or in risk of losing, because sometimes people will ask me that and they'll be like, well, what rights are trans people losing? And it's like, okay, well, maybe it's not rights, but they're definitely losing some privileges.
That is a fact. There's no rebuttal.
I think I just gave a pretty good rebuttal.
I've been telling y'all this. They're trying to erase trans people from the history books. They're trying to erase any mention of us.
Well, actually, in this particular context, I don't think that trans people really belong there. And I think it's kind of a good thing to, quote unquote, erase trans people from that particular part, especially because if you don't know the way that it's been working in the trans community, trans people for the last couple of years now have basically been blackmailing the rest of the letters, like the LGB, because of the all, we've done this much for you. We're the ones that started the movement. They'll say regularly, without trans people, there would be no LGBTQ community. Without trans people, there would be no LGBTQ movement. And I think it's very important, and I think it's very helpful that Donald Trump gave us this separation, because they've said that for so long that now we as gays can be like, you know what? You're not even officially part of the thing. Like, you go to any website, including this one, including the passport portal, including everything else, you'll see that it's just LGB. We don't owe you anything. We don't owe you our lives. We don't owe you our firstborn, because you did something, or in your minds, you did more than you actually did. Like, that's the most frustrating thing about the trans community right now, is they're constantly trying to hold this over our heads, and they're constantly trying to tell us how much that we actually owe them, when really their contribution hasn't been nearly what they think it's been. Like, have trans people been helpful? Yes, most definitely. Just like I said, Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, even though they're debatably not trans, or weren't debatably trans when that happened, were very helpful to the movement and in general what we consider gay rights to this day. But at the same time, we don't owe them everything, and there were plenty of other people that were doing a lot of work too that happened to be gay and lesbian and bisexual. So to now have to completely give everything over to trans people and let them completely run us into the ground if they want to, does not seem fair to me on any level. Let me know down below in the comments if you feel any differently, but I don't feel like we owe them to drive off the cliff with them because they want to drive off the cliff over whatever they want to drive off the cliff over. Some of us feel like, okay, let that be your argument now. Let that be your fight. And so I think at some point, as a community, if we're going to continue to be a community, we really do have to, moving forward, look at how much we actually want to let the trans community run what it is we're doing. Because I think a lot of us are very happy And I think as far as being a political movement for at least the foreseeable future, there will be certain specialized needs that we might have as the LGBT community when it comes to healthcare. There are different things that we deal with as far as being at risk for certain things, like when monkeypox happened, which I know we're not supposed to say monkeypox was a gay thing, but it kind of was. And just like HIV and AIDS, these things hit our community harder than others. And so sometimes we do need a bit of a mouthpiece or a foot in the door when it comes to dealing with our legislators. So I understand that, but I think that our movement has just turned into such a cash cow that the people that are supposed to be working for us are really hurting us by not reining in the trans community and just being like, okay, there's certain things that we really don't need to make our fight. Yeah, right now it's only affecting trans people for the most part. But if we're not careful, it really will start to affect us as gay, lesbian, and bisexual. And that's just the fact of the matter. That's just seeing the writing on the wall. So honestly, we do have to think about how much exactly we want the trans community and the queer community. If you ask me, the queer community doesn't need to be involved at all. But sane as anybody's going to be, or as sane as they can be, however you want to put it, trans people, I know it sounds like an oxymoron to some of you, but sane transsexuals like Buck Angel, like a Blair White, if they want to be a part of the community, in my opinion, they should have a home here. But as far as the extremists and the blue-haired non-binaries that are just ruining everybody's life right now, those I don't think we need. And so that's why I think this is a good thing. I think this is a good thing because we need a breather and a break so we can decide exactly how much we want to allow these people to have control over the community or have a say in the community. And if that bothers anybody, stay bothered.
And where are all my other trans content creators at? Why are y'all so silent? Hello?
They're probably over it too. And if all of you are smart, you'll keep your mouth shut, you'll let the public breathe, and you'll stop trying to push any kind of agenda at all for a little bit. Nobody needs to hear from you right now, trans people. Over the last 10 years, you have said enough for a lifetime. You have completely lost most of the straight people, and especially the women, and now even the gays don't have your back anymore. So recognize when it's gone too far and just shut it now. Zip it.
I literally posted a video about how I'm being represented by the ACLU and suing the president, to fight for trans rights in this country.
What you're calling trans rights is you changing the sex marker on your passport, and falsifying government documents is not a right. So I honestly feel like you're going to lose that case anyway, and I don't care if you have the ACLU representing you. I think you're going to lose that case based on the fact that it is not a biological fact that you are a female. That's what your sex marker says. Either male or female, even though you may present or look like a female, and you may say that you feel like a female, but your sex marker on your legal documents probably shouldn't change because you just are what you are.
And only a handful of trans content creators reached out to me or reposted or showed their support. Where y'all at? Where are you? Now is not the time to be silent, trans or not. Speak up, people. They're erasing our history right in front of our eyes.
I am 100% speaking up and speaking out right now, even though I may not be saying the things that you want me to say or saying them the way that you want me to say them. But one thing that I really did discover in doing this video, after doing the research and really thinking about everything the way that I've thought about it, I really do feel like the modern trans movement, for as much as they complain about people trying to erase them and erase them from history and erase their history, I feel like they don't realize that they are actually doing that to gay, lesbian, and bisexual. They're doing that to everybody else in the community because they've tried to take over basically everything it is to be gay or what was considered LGBT before. Like suddenly we no longer have a place in history because we owe it all to trans people. Like I mentioned Bob Kohler, but he's one of the few names that I know that's an actual gay man that really did help in the original movement. When it comes to lesbians, if you're gay or lesbian, or even if you're straight and you just know a lot about gay history, when it comes to lesbians, who are lesbians throughout history that have really changed a lot? Like Stormy DeLarvier, are they not erasing Stormy DeLarvier's contribution by saying that it was either Marsha P. Johnson or Sylvia Rivera, who are trans but not even trans, that actually started it, when Stormy DeLarvier was the person that most people think that if anybody set it off? Is that not basically erasing a lesbian or a lesbian's contribution to the gay rights movement and where we are now as LGBT? Or is it only trans people that are in danger of being erased? Because I honestly feel like the modern trans movement really is erasing gays and lesbians and turning the movement into being about them. And when it comes to the contributions of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, I can't stress enough that I really am grateful to them, even if Sylvia Rivera did mess up with the transgender thing at the end of her life. But when it comes down to actually what they did, it was great. And for a lot of people, they are the faces of the original LGBT or gay movement. A lot of people would recognize, or at least within the community, would recognize Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. But that doesn't mean they were the whole of the movement, and they definitely weren't doing all the work in the movement. They both were broke, which we all know that movements like these do take money. So that's probably where the gay men come in. That's the way it usually works. If you guys want to know how it is, the trans or the drag will be the face of something. You know, they're out front doing the shows and high kicks and whatever else. And then the gays are funding it, because gay men love making money and love spending money. Thank you for my life. Not all of it, not older, but when I was younger, yeah. But yeah, so the gay men are the ones funding everything, and then the lesbians are handling the administrative. And so it really has been, if anything, a group effort, or it had been up until recently. I joke, but that really is the way that it works in a lot of times. A lot of times the gay men are in charge of the figuring out how to get the money, how to make the money, and then the lesbians are really good at organizing everything, make sure everybody's where they're supposed to be, make sure the money's getting spent the way that it needs to be spent, making sure that the I's are crossed and the T's are dotted. But seriously, they're handling all of that stuff in a lot of cases. And the queens, whether they're drag or trans, are the entertainment and the fun and, you know, a part of putting a face to everything. Or that's what I've noticed the contributions to be. And I don't think that, if we're being honest about it, anybody needs to be erased. But if anybody is erasing anybody, I would say that it's the trans people that have been erasing the other letters for at least the last 10 years now. Like, how is it you're one part of the population but 99% of the problems?
Do you not see it? It's gonna be a long 4 years, y'all. A long 4 years.
Okay, so obviously that was the end of the video, and these next 4 years will be as long as you make them. Like, yeah, if you continue to complain and make yourselves the victims, it will definitely be a long 4 years. But what I would recommend, and what my advice would be, and keep in mind that through social media and the amount of time that I've been on the road, I would honestly say that I can give you some good advice. What the trans community should be doing over the next 4 years is staying quiet on any kind of agenda or ideology, and really just looking inside and seeing what you need to correct, because this is no longer an us problem. This is no longer something you can put on society. Society gave you an honest try. Society really had your back for a minute there and was really pulling for the trans community, because as much as everybody tries to make America seem like it's a terrible place and it's racist and homophobic and transphobic and whatever else you want to say about America, America loves an underdog. And for a minute there, the trans community was the underdog, and America was really trying to pull for you. America was really trying to give you an honest shot, and America was willing to let you in. That's why you were on the TV. That's why, if you remember, RuPaul's Drag Race, which isn't trans, but is definitely on the queer side of things. Look at what we had as far as the media went. Look at how happy people were even with Glee. So when it comes to LGBT in general, trans included, everybody was very open to it. And and then trans went too far. So it really is a good time for the next 4 years when you're not going to be able to get a lot done because the administration just isn't going to have it and the American public doesn't have your back. What I would be doing is recalibrating and also building goodwill again with straight people and really working towards having a good relationship with women specifically, letting women know that you do have their backs and that you will work with them. And I see a fair amount of transsexual people doing this. Transsexual women, trans women, I see doing this with real women where they're really trying to say, I'm not trying to be that. And if you don't want me in your spaces, I won't be in your spaces. I'm not trying to invade. I'm not trying to do anything wrong. I really just want to live as me. And my goal is not in any way to insult you or take over what you are. And I also see some women being very open to that, being like, yeah, if you're not trying to be a threat and you can understand that I have boundaries and you can understand that there are certain spaces that I just don't want or need you in, I think that that would be a better way to go at it and see if you can non-verbally negotiate your way into having the life that you actually want. And yeah, that may mean certain spaces may not be available to you. And that may mean you should have the LGBT organizations lobby for third spaces that make it so you can be comfortable around other people like yourselves. But whatever it is, it doesn't need to be by any kind of force. Nobody wants to hear you whining, crying, or protesting, and you can do whatever you want. But I am honestly telling you, as a person that really does want to see the best happen for both trans women and women, but I can tell you that continuing to push trans ideology and trans women are women on everybody, and especially women, is going to be a losing strategy. And I will repeat, these next 4 years will literally be as long as you choose to make them. You have your destiny in your own hands, trans community. And that's the way I feel about it. So let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. If you want to see a video of an NYC trans woman that did the unthinkable, click the link on your screen. Other than that, as always, thank you for watching. This has been Ty Rivera, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world.
They bought into his bullshit.